Well, good morning, everybody. Hope you're having a great Father's Day weekend so far, and I'm so glad that you've carved out some time to be here today so that we can worship and learn together. And let me give a big shout out to those of you who are watching live online right now. Great to have you guys with us, including my parents who are watching at home right now. Happy Father's Day, Dad. And it's good to be here as we continue this series. It's called Jesus On. And the premise of this series is very simple. During the summer, we're going to be talking about what Jesus had to say on some very important subjects in our lives. And throughout this series, we're just going to be walking our way through the most common teaching of Jesus and the longest teaching of Jesus recorded anywhere in the Bible, called the Sermon on the Mount. It's in Matthew chapters 5, 6, and 7. And not only is it the longest teaching recorded in the Bible from him, it is also the most famous teaching. In fact, there are phrases and ideas that you find in the Sermon on the Mount that have become really part of our popular culture. Ideas like turn the other cheek, go the extra mile, don't judge, love your enemies, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, what we know as the golden rule. And all of these phrases and these ideas, if you could trace them all the way back, they are originally found in this teaching of Jesus that was given almost 2,000 years ago on the side of a mountain to his followers. And during this message, within this message, Jesus is really painting a picture of life in God's kingdom. And even as you can tell from those phrases, he's describing the kind of life that often goes against the grain of culture. He's teaching his followers then and now what it means to live right side up in a world that is often upside down. And so I'm looking forward to this. I think it's going to be a great series. We're going to learn a lot together. But for today, I just want to focus our attention on 4 verses found in Matthew chapter 5. And these 4 verses, if you would describe yourself as a Christian, these 4 verses are a call to action. They describe our purpose. It's why we are here in this world. In the weeks to come, we're going to be talking about how we ought to live as followers of Christ. But today, we're going to talk about why we should live that way. Let me just start by reading these 4 verses. Jesus said this, Matthew chapter 5. He said, "You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." Now, if I could summarize what Jesus was saying here in a way that really resonates with us as 21st century Americans, I would say it this way. I think he was essentially saying that if you're a Christian, you are God's marketing campaign. Like we are God's representatives in this world. We are living, breathing advertisements for our Father in heaven. And here's the thing about marketing. I think we all know this, that there's good marketing and bad marketing, right? There are advertisements that draw you toward a product and make you want to buy it. There are others that have the opposite effect. I'll give you some examples. This was a print advertisement for Bic pens, and they were advertising their soft gel pens that could write very well on a soft surface. And it says, "New soft gel pens make cheating even more comfortable. Bic, helping students cheat since 1945. Now, as you can imagine, there was a bit of an uproar among teachers and parents when they saw this advertisement. This was not good marketing. You don't want to be someone who's encouraging kids to cheat their way through school, okay? Bad marketing. Here's another example. Kleenex came out with a larger size tissue, what they called man-sized Kleenex, okay? And it says, confidently strong, comfortingly soft. But there were some women who communicated with the Kleenex company, and they said, wait a minute, are only men confident? Are you trying to say that only men can be strong and confidently strong? There was a bit of a backlash, so now they call them extra large, okay? So good marketing and bad marketing. This is an ad from the 1950s, a new product that came out called cellophane. You see so many good things in DuPont cellophane. Now, eventually we discovered that it is not a good idea to wrap your children in cellophane, okay? So this was not communicating a very good practice. And then there are some advertisements, and you read them, and they are just plain confusing. It's kind of blurry, but I'll read it for you. Free single deal from our new double value menu with the purchase of any 2-for double deal sandwich. Like, what? I don't understand what I'm getting here, okay? So marketing can be good, it can be bad, it can draw people toward a product, or it can push them away. Now, if you describe yourself as a Christian, the same thing is true for every single one of us. The way that we live, the things that we say, the things that we do for the people around us can either attract them to a relationship with Christ or distract them from it. That's the point of these 4 verses. This is the challenge that Jesus was laying down for those who are his followers. And he uses these 2 very ordinary objects, these 2 word pictures, to describe our calling in this world. He talks about salt and light. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. What did he mean by that? Well, let's kind of unpack these a little bit. We'll start with that first phrase. You are the salt of the earth. And when Jesus used this description, he was talking about one of the most useful and important elements, especially in that culture. Here's what salt does. It does 3 things. Number 1, salt enhances flavor. You know that, right? That was true even in the first century, especially for those who were very wealthy. They would use salt to enhance the flavor of food. I don't know about you, but I like salt. I remember I was shopping one time in a grocery store, and I brought home some chicken noodle soup in cans. And I did not read the label carefully enough and discovered later I had bought chicken noodle soup that was salt-free, sodium-free. Have you ever had that? Don't bother. It's terrible. I don't know why people would buy that. We had sweet corn for dinner this past week, some of the first sweet corn of the season. I don't know if I could eat sweet corn without a little bit of salt on it, right? And here's the thing with salt. You don't eat sweet corn and walk away saying, man, that was great salt. You walk away saying that was great sweet corn, because what salt does is it doesn't draw attention to itself. It just enhances the flavor of whatever it is associated with. And so perhaps Jesus was saying you are the salt of the earth. Your role is to enhance the flavor, bring out the goodness of any environment that you find yourself in. Here's the second thing that salt does. It protects health. Every medical doctor in the first century would carry salt in his medical pouch with him because salt was used as an antiseptic. It was used sometimes to treat skin diseases or mouth diseases. In fact, even today, there's kind of a home remedy when you have a sore throat. Somebody might tell you to gargle with what? With salt water, yes. And I don't know if you know this or not, but salt is actually a biological necessity in our body because salt is what helps regulate blood pressure and fluid movement. And without enough salt in your diet, your blood won't circulate right, and your muscles won't contract, and you might even have heart problems. And so I think Jesus was saying, you're the salt of the earth, and as the salt of the earth, I want you to have a healing effect, a restorative effect on every environment that you find yourself in. But then salt does a third thing, and this was the most common and most important use of salt in the first century. It was used to prevent decay. There was no refrigeration. Couldn't buy food in cans or in vacuum-packed, glass jars. And so the only way to preserve food to eat it later on would be to use salt, and they did this especially with meat. So you would take a piece of meat and you would soak it in a salt solution, and the salt would infiltrate the fibers of the meat and kill the bacteria. And you could actually preserve meat for 3 to 4 months by using salt. And so Jesus was saying to those of us who are his followers, you're the salt of the earth. I'm calling you to preserve what is around you, to be a preserving influence in your culture, to resist the decay of this world and to fight against that. So salt enhances flavor, protects health, and it prevents decay. And because of that, salt was one of the most essential minerals and most valuable commodities in the first century. And we take salt for granted because it's so cheap and readily available, but we forget that throughout most of history, salt was something that was very, very valuable. In fact, in 300 BC, the first Roman road was built. And the Romans were famous for their roads. The very first one they built was called the Via Salaria. It means the way of salt. And it was the road that was used to get salt to Rome, the capital city of the Roman Empire. In this time in history, Roman soldiers received at least part of their pay in salt. In fact, that's where we get the word salary. It comes from the word salt. And we have this old saying, he's not worth his salt. It means he's not worth what he's being paid. But this continued to be true. In 1785, believe it or not, in England, approximately 10,000 people were arrested for salt smuggling in 1 year. Is that not crazy? You know, you're sitting in a jail cell, you turn to the guy next to you, hey, what are you in for? Salt smuggling. How about you? Yeah, me too, you know. And nowadays we get it in little packets for free, but it was so valuable, people would smuggle it. Even in 1864, the Union Army fought a bloody battle to capture Saltville, Virginia, because Saltville, Virginia was the main supplier of salt for the Confederate Army. And so in 1864, hundreds of soldiers gave their lives to capture Saltville and to cut off the salt supply for the Confederate soldiers. There are entire books written about the Battle of Saltville. Now, I mention all of this because something that we don't realize is that salt was one of the most valuable commodities in existence throughout human history. And so when Jesus chose this word to describe the people who would follow him, this was astounding. He was saying, you are the salt of the earth. You are one of the most valuable commodities in this world. Without you, this world would fall apart. Now, again, I think this must have been so encouraging to the people who were listening to him, because think about the people who were listening to him, the followers of Jesus in the first century. They were not the wealthy, the sophisticated, the financially connected, the powerful people. They were fishermen and tax collectors and nobodies, and they were outcasts. I mean, these were people with sketchy histories and serious imperfections. And these are the people to whom Jesus says, you are the salt of the earth. Reminding me that when God wants to do his greatest work in this world, he uses common, ordinary, everyday people like you and me. And he's saying to you today, if you would describe yourself as a Christian, he's saying to you, you are so valuable to what I want to accomplish in this world today. You are the salt of the earth. I need you. I can't do this without you. Then he goes on to use a second word picture. Verse 14, he says, you are the light of the world. And we all know what light does. Light, first of all, provides direction, doesn't it? A lighthouse gives direction to a ship and keeps it from crashing on the rocks. The runway lights at an airport guide an airline pilot to land that plane safely. Light gives direction. Secondly, light gives life. Every plant needs light to grow. Our human bodies need sunlight. We produce vitamin D from the sunlight that we receive in our bodies. In fact, there's a disorder called seasonal affective disorder that's a mild form of depression from not getting enough light. People around here sometimes struggle with it. In fact, all of us are going to drift into that this week. The forecast is cloudy and rain again. So we're all going to be like real depressed again, okay? Because we need light. It gives us life. Third thing that light does is it dispels the darkness. And here's what's so interesting as people living in the 21st century, we don't even know, for the most part, what real darkness is because we're surrounded so much with man-made light, even at night. It's very, very rare that we find ourselves in utter and complete darkness. But when you find yourself in utter and complete darkness, it can be very frightful, very confusing. There's this tourist attraction here in Scranton, Pennsylvania. It's called the Lackawanna Coal Mine Tour, all right? For those of you who are online and out of the area, next time you visit, try out the Lackawanna Coal Mine Tour. How many of you in the room have ever done the Lackawanna Coal Mine Tour? Yeah, Debbie and I did that when we were dating about 30 years ago. And if you've been there, you know there's this one point in the tour where the tour guide turns off all the electric lights in that underground mine. And let me tell you, it gets really, really, really dark, which is not a bad thing if you're dating. But, I mean, when you're in that kind of darkness, there is fear, there's confusion. I remember holding up my hand, and I could feel the heat from my hand, but I couldn't see it. I couldn't even see the outline of it. And whenever you're in that kind of darkness, you feel so disoriented, and there's confusion and there's fear. And so Jesus is saying, listen, this world left to itself will inevitably drift toward greater and greater darkness. You will be the ones who will give direction, give life, and dispel the darkness around you if you're living the way that I call you to live. And so Jesus says this, he says, you are the salt of the earth, you are the light of the world. Now here's something very important to recognize. In the Greek language in which the New Testament was originally written, word placement in a sentence was very important because you could emphasize certain things by where you would place certain words in a sentence. And so the word you is in what's called the emphatic position, which means it could say this, you and you alone are the salt of the earth. You and you alone are the light of the world. Jesus never said the government would be the light of the world and the salt of the earth. He didn't say that education would be the salt of the earth and the light of the world. He certainly did not say that the media would be the salt of the earth and the light of the world. He said, you and you alone are salt and light. If you are not shining, this world will have no light. If you are not salty, this world will have no salt. I am depending upon you. There is no plan B. And I think we can summarize the function of salt and the function of light in just one word. It's the word influence. Salt and light have radical influence on whatever they come in contact with. Anything that salt or light happens to touch is changed by it. And that's the idea here. As followers of Christ, we are called not just to take up space and breathe air and wait for heaven to come. We're called to live our lives in such a way that we bring a kingdom influence into the little kingdoms of this world. But Jesus also talked about two things that could undermine our influence, two things that could compromise our ability to be salt and light, two dangers that we need to guard against. He talks here about the risk of contamination. He says, you are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You know, in the day when Jesus lived, they didn't have the technology for refining salt the way that we do today. And so sometimes you would have something that looked like salt, but it was contaminated by dirt or sand or other kinds of minerals. And once you had salt that was contaminated, it was humanly impossible to divide out, to separate out the actual salt again. And so the only thing you could do was throw it away. But you would never throw it in a garden or in a field where you wanted something to grow because it would kill it. They would throw it on the roads or on the pathways, and it would literally be trampled underfoot. Here's the point. Jesus is saying, you are the salt of the earth, but whatever you do, don't lose your savor. Don't absorb the values and the philosophies and the practices of the culture in which you find yourself. Don't lose your distinctiveness, because when you lose your flavor, you will lose your influence. People will reject your message, and they will no longer respect you. You will be trampled underfoot if you become this hypocritical in name only follower of Christ. I often quote Sheldon Van Auken in his book, A Severe Mercy, where he says this. He says, the best argument for Christianity is Christians, their joy, their certainty, their completeness. But the strongest argument against Christianity is also Christians. When they're somber and joyless, when they're self-righteous and smug in complacent consecration, when they are narrow and repressive, then Christianity dies 1,000 deaths. Jesus says, don't let the grace, the joy, the salt of your life be contaminated. But then there's another risk. It's this risk. It's the risk of isolation. He says this. He says, you are the light of the world. Right? But we all know that in order for light to do any good, people have to actually see it. So he gives two pictures here of light that is seen. He says a town built on a hill cannot be hidden. And in those days, it was quite common to build a town or a city up on a hill. It was a great defensive position. But a town that was up on a hill was also easy to see from a distance, even at night, because on a fully moonlit night, the moonlight would reflect off the limestone out of which cities were built in those days. And you could see that city on a hill from a great distance, and it would give you direction, and it would give you hope. And Jesus was saying, you're the light of the world, but position yourself in such a way. Stand in such a place, shine in such a place that people can actually see you. Don't try to hide your light from the world around you. And then he gives another word picture as well. He goes on to say this, neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Duh, of course, we all know that. He didn't say that, but it's in the Greek language. If you really understand the Greek, duh is in there. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. Now, in our day, you walk into a room, you flip a switch, and the room lights up. It's really simple. Didn't work that way in the first century. In fact, most homes only possessed one oil lamp. And so when you needed light, you had to position that oil lamp in just the right place so it would give the maximum amount of light for the most people. And so they would often put it up high on a stand or hang it from something, often in the corner of the room so it would reflect off the walls and spread light as far as possible. And Jesus says, listen, you need to take that light that I have put within you. As I begin to transform your heart, allow that light to shine. And here's why, verse 16. In the same way as a city on a hill, as the same way as a lamp on a stand, let your light shine before others. Here's what I want you to see. Jesus did not say, if you're a Christian, Jesus did not say, you're the light of the church. He said, you're the light of the world. And see, one of the biggest problems I believe in the church in Western culture today is this, in my humble opinion. I believe that there is this tendency for Christians to gradually turn their attention inward and to structure our lives in such a way that we only spend time with people who look like us and think like us and talk like us, and we take that light that we've been given and we keep it inside the four walls of a church building, and we escape the darkness of this world. We isolate ourselves. It's not a good thing to do. That's not the point of our existence. I mean, think about it this way. Imagine this fall football season starts. You sit down to watch a Philadelphia Eagles football game. And the Eagles get their first possession, their first offensive play. And so Carson Wentz is out on the field if he's not injured this year. And he's out there and everybody huddles around him and he calls a play. And after he calls a play, everybody steps back and they start to slow clap. And they pat him on the back and they say, man, that was an awesome play that you just called. And then they all jog over to the bench and they sit down. A few minutes later, they get off the bench, come back out to the middle of the field. They huddle around. Carson Wentz calls a play, and they stand up and they say, that was the best play call we've heard in so long. Carson, you are like one of the best play callers in the history of the NFL. We love the way that you call plays. And they jog over and sit down on the bench again. And they keep doing this. And eventually what's going to happen is you're going to be standing up and screaming at your television. And you're going to be saying this, run the play. Run the play, because see, the mission of a football team is not to huddle. The mission of a football team is to actually run the plays, to actually advance the ball down the field, to actually win. I think God would speak to a lot of churches today and he would say, run the play. I've not called you to huddle for an hour a week. You're called to get dirty, to get sweaty, to advance the ball down the field, to be salt and light. Stop just sitting around in a huddle and be the light that I've called you to be. Don't isolate yourself. There's the risk of contamination and the risk of isolation, and either one of those can keep us from living up to our calling. It does no good to be involved in this world if your salt has lost its savor, if there is nothing distinctive about your life. On the other hand, it does no good to have a life of savor and distinctiveness if nobody who needs to see it ever sees it. Now look at the very last phrase here. This is what will happen when we live up to our calling. In the same way, let your light shine before others. Here's why, that they may see your good deeds, not just hear your good words. They may see your good deeds and glorify or praise your Father in heaven. Jesus was saying this, I want you not just to believe something, I want you to do something. I want you to live a certain way. Because Christianity is not about being informed by a set of beliefs. It's not about being conformed to a set of religious practices. It's about being transformed from the inside out in such a way that people look at you and they see something different in you, and it draws their attention to your Father in heaven. Somebody once said it this way, live in such a way that those who know you but don't know God will come to know God because they know you. If you're an authentic follower of Christ, I believe that people should see something in you that is not of this world. That they should pick up on the fact that there is something different and attractive about your parenting, about your marriage, about your values, about the way that you show up and do your job every single day. There should be something in us that is different and attractive and powerful and distinctive that other people do not possess, that they are drawn to. And let's face it, that's why some of you are here in church today, right? Because somewhere along the way, you ran into a Christ follower who lived in such a way and spoke in such a way that it attracted you to something. And eventually you figured it out and you embraced that faith and you gave your heart to your Father in heaven. The fact that some of you are even sitting in a church today is because somewhere along the way somebody did this for you. And we need to live this way for others. And I'll tell you why this is so important. Because I believe more than ever, we live in a world where the darkness is increasing and the decay is advancing, especially here in northeastern Pennsylvania. There was a study that came out about 10 days ago from the Barna Research Group. It's called The Most Post-Christian Cities in America. And by post-Christian, they mean cities where the influence of Christianity is fading most quickly. They mean cities where historic Christian beliefs and practices are being forgotten or abandoned at the fastest rate. And they did a whole bunch of research, and they came up with a list of the top 100 most post-Christian cities in America. I want to show you a screenshot of part of that list. Number 12 on the list, Wilkes-Barre, Scranton, Hazleton, Pennsylvania. Number 12 of the most post-Christian cities in the United States, which means this: we live in a part of the U.S. where the message of the gospel is fading very quickly. And where with every succeeding generation, more and more people walk away from church and therefore walk away from God. We live in a place where the darkness is increasing and the decay is advancing. And as the darkness increases, hope begins to fade. Joy begins to fade. People become more broken. Addiction increases. Suicide increases. In other words, we have a great task before us. We need to live up to our calling, to be salt and light. We have to. So how do we apply this? Let me talk about two ways to apply this. First of all, I think there's a very personal application that you can make. God has placed you where you are in your job, your neighborhood, your school, your family. He has placed you where you are for a purpose. He has placed you there not by accident, but by His divine intention and for His good purposes to be an influence wherever you are. Imagine if all of us were to look at the places we work and the places we live and the people that we hang out with, and every morning we were to get up in the morning and bring to mind the names and faces of the people that we're going to encounter that day, and we were to just pray, God, help me today to live in such a way, to speak in such a way, to do things that will cause people to wonder and that will demand an explanation. Help me somehow to point the attention of people around me to their Father in heaven, the one who wants to be their rescuer and redeemer. What if we all just decided to do that? Because here's the thing. Right now, you have friends at work. You have acquaintances at the gym. You have people on a sports team or in your school that you may be the only authentic Christian that they will ever encounter. And some of those people may be one invitation away from walking into a church like this and hearing about God's heart for them. Will you be that light? Will you be that salt? Or maybe they won't walk into a church building, but maybe they'll sit at your kitchen table and have a spiritual conversation with you and maybe a Bible study with you. I think we need to apply this personally, but I think we need to apply this collectively together as a church, because Jesus said, He said, you are the salt of the earth, you are the light of the world. And another distinction here between the English language and the Greek language was that in the Greek, they had different words for you, singular, and you, plural. We just have you. Or the closest thing we have is y'all, you all, or yous guys, northeastern Pennsylvania. That's kind of what Jesus was saying. He's talking to a crowd of people. You, all of you together, collectively, working together are the salt of the earth. All of you collectively together, working together, are the light of the world. See, what we can do together is far greater than what we can do individually on our own. And as a church, as a community of believers, I believe we have been gathered together in this place in God's time so that collectively we can bring light to increasing darkness and bring salt to advancing decay. There was a question I heard about 4 years ago. I've mentioned to you that this question has haunted me ever since. If your church were to suddenly cease to exist, would the people in your community miss you? If for some reason Parker Hill Church disappeared, would people even notice? Would they even care? See, I want the answer to this question to be yes. I want it to be a resounding yes. But the answer to this question can only be yes when every single one of us is playing the part that God is calling us to play. So that's my question for you today. Are you being salt? Are you being light? Not just individually and personally, but are you stepping into a role here where you're a part of the team? You're not just in the huddle. You're not just on the bench. You're actually on the field. I want to encourage you to do that. I want to encourage you to move beyond being a consumer to be an actual player on the team and find a place to serve. In fact, I want to narrow this way down and give you one opportunity to consider. I want you to consider being someone who can help the next generation grow up to be salt and light for their generation. I want to encourage you to find a place to serve in our kids' ministries and our student ministries. You heard about this a few weeks ago. There's some amazing things happening there, and dozens of opportunities. And I'll tell you why this right now is just something that's on my heart. Because over the last month or so, our family has been through some changes. My older daughter got married 3 weeks ago. Walked her down the grass aisle and gave her away. My younger daughter, she graduated from high school on Friday. And, you know, these are bittersweet moments for a parent, right? You hate to see them go, but you also find joy in knowing that they're doing well in life. And our kids are doing well in life. My daughter, Leah, she married a great young man down in South Carolina who's the pastor of a church down there. That's where they're going to be living. My daughter, Olivia, she's going to go to college this fall, again in South Carolina, be buying a lot of plane tickets to South Carolina. She's studying to be a nurse, and she wants to use that not just here in hospitals in the U.S., but in places around the world where medical care is not available as easily, as readily. My kids love God. They live out their faith courageously and graciously. And Debbie and I are very, very thankful for that, but here's what else we know. We know it's not because of us. We know that we can't take the credit for that. We know that over the last 2 decades, there have been dozens of people who've invested in the lives of our kids in this place. Small group leaders, teachers, adults who gave up weekends or weeks in the summer to go on trips and retreats, adults who served alongside them in their own serving capacities here in the church. I believe that our kids are who they are today, not just because of their parents, because we could have messed it up royally, and we probably did a lot of times, but because of so many others who poured into the lives of our kids. And Debbie and I, I'll tell you, will be forever, forever grateful for the crew members in this church that our kids have grown up in, who poured into their lives and helped them to become the young women they are today. See, we can only be the church that God is calling us to be when a lot of people choose collectively to be salt and light. And I want to encourage you just to find your place. Find your place on the team, on the field. Maybe it is in kids ministries or student ministries. You can stop out at the Next Steps area, just say, hey, I'm interested. You don't have to commit today. We'll talk you through that and see if that's a place for you. But find your place to be salt and light. We're going to have the band come on back up. We're going to close with one more song, an exclamation point on the end of this service. So this is not your cue to leave, okay? Sit tight as we wrap up. But as they're coming, let me just say this. There was a great movement that began almost 2,000 years ago called the church. And the church is not a building. It's not an hour a week. The church is not a monument to the past. It's intended to be a movement in the present. And so here's the thing. You're either in or you're out. You're either salt or you have no flavor at all. You're either light or you're just part of the background fog of the darkness. What are you going to be? More than ever before, I think we need every person who calls this their church to be a part of what God wants to do in this place. So the question is, you're going to be a consumer and week after week just consume and let everybody else push the ball down the field, or are you going to jump in and join us? I think that's what Jesus was saying. This is one of those messages that kind of kicks us all in the butt, doesn't it? But this is so important because this is how we find meaning in life, by doing what God is calling us to do. I mean, so many things in life that we do, that we give our time to, they won't matter 10 years from now, let alone eternity from now. But being salt and light, being influenced personally and collectively, it's going to matter to us and to the people around us. That's how important this is. As the band sets up, just watch this with me.